Hey FaceMakers, welcome back to the last installment of Pancakes. I've gone through quite a bit of information for you. I hope it has been good for you. But the cool thing about pancake molds, as I mentioned before, is you can do a lot of things with them. Now, the videos you'll see, after my little talk here, my little intro, we'll take you through all the sculpting and the molding and some of the detail work. I'm using clean clay to do this. What I usually do with my clean clay is it comes in these flat strips with plastic. I'll soak it in warm water just to soften it up, and then I'll usually cut it into like 1-inch strips. That way I can use a rolling pin type device to roll it down and get it really nice and flat. Even if you roll it into a little strips like that, it'll help it roll out even better. The softer the clay that you're using, the easier it's going to be to roll out, but the more fragile it is. So my flashing, a lot of times I will use a softer clean clay and a more firm clean clay for sculpting. And I usually only use clean clay for projects I want to do very quickly. I usually sculpt in Chavant, like a medium hardness, so that way I can warm it up, get it the way I want it, and as it hardens up I can do my detailing. Clean clay affords me to make something very fast and move very quickly, so I have a fast turnaround, especially if I'm doing a fast job. So follow along with these videos. This cut up with some good narration. You're going to be looking at my hands a lot, but I think you'll get the point. So if you look at the first video on making your pattern, the second video on the types of molds you can make with the pancake mold method, as I call it, and this one will give you your final chapter on making your own pancakes. And they don't have to be giant and big like this one I'm doing. They can be smaller. They can be as small as teeny tiny things like I mentioned before for just little blenders. So that should help you move on and improve your skills for something that may come up for you. It's a great way to make molds that you can store easily because of their flat presence and keep them stored. I've got a lot of pancake molds back there, and it's easy to get to them, it's easy to organize them, and they seem to last forever. So you don't have to make them in repro or polyester plastic. You can make them in ultracal if you want, but that still allows you to make an inexpensive mold in a relatively short time. So enjoy this video, and I hope you learned something. Get your notepad out, take some notes.
I just took a big piece of PVC, and you can buy O-rings at the hardware store. This is a little big, but you can get them all sizes and all thicknesses. So if you get one that'll slide over a piece of PVC like so, depending on the thickness of your O-ring, you can adjust the depth of which it stands off of the rolling surface. So these are little square O-rings, kind of. So I put those on. Those are about 1/8 of an inch thick. So I laid out my big thick piece of clay that was left over. I got it nice and warm. I rolled from the middle out. There you go. If you start from the end and roll, look what happens. Usually it'll pick this up. It'll start wrapping, so you don't want that to happen. There we go. Nice thickness. Okay, now it's just a matter of puzzling it, piecing it all together like a puzzle. So we've got our shape here. I'm going to taper it out so it can look a little funky at first. So I'm just going to lay this in like that. There we go. Push those together. Bend it. Good thing about clean clay is it's not my favorite clay for sculpting, but for flat things like this, it's perfect. It's quick for fast sculpts. Here I can kind of figure out how I'm going with this. There we go. Just kind of find all the shapes. There we go. Now we got the basic shape out. This guy right here is real easy because I can just line it up on there, go around it. Since this is kind of a additional piece to go under here, I don't want it too thick. See, that's a nice thickness right there. It's like 1/8 of an inch thick. That'll go nice right there. There we go. Press it down. Now I want this area to be a little thicker. I'll probably do another piece about this big to go right in here, and then I'll taper it all out. So this is about 1/8 of an inch thick. It's just a matter of, working it all out. This tool right here is perfect for that. Smoothing all those pieces together. If you have any scraps you need to throw in there, fill in the dead spaces. I can lay out my my piece here. This is the thickest area. I want to taper out. So I'm just going to take this area right here. I'm going to mark it like so. Kind of like a miniature version of this. So now it's just a matter kind of rolling that edge off, working that off right there, just feathering that out so it's all nice and smooth and just tapers down to a nice blending edge with this, the thickest area. Along the way, I'll probably use a little toothpick or something to see the thickness, make sure that it's the right depth. You can take a toothpick and just mark 1/4 of an inch on it and just stick down into it, and if it comes up to the mark, you're perfect. And then along the outside, you can put a toothpick with a little 1/8 of an inch, and you can stick down in here, because you want this to go from 1/4 of an inch to like 1/8 of an inch to like 1/16 of an inch to blending right down. If you look sideways at it, it does have a little bit of a concave shape, but it's so low profile, and because it wraps around a curved surface, you'll never catch it. And it's thin enough here so that if you have the clavicle bone or different parts of the anatomy, like the cords of the neck may run through here, because it's thin enough, it'll just follow the contour. Like say the Adam's apple is right in here. This will be tapered down small enough so the Adam's apple shape will be softened, but it'll still show through. You got to remember, this is for a quick shot on camera of a throat slash or a bullet hit or a cut or something like that. So whether it's exactly the same anatomy as the Adam's apple or certain parts of the neck, you don't have to worry about it. A few very soft wrinkles, and of course the skin texture will all run like this. So as it wraps around the neck, it'll conform to the neck, and then the lines in the neck will all coincide with the piece. Okay, now to start things off, I'm tapering down my 2 layers of clay with a wooden tool, basically just like a giant spoon, and I'm roughing off that little drop off from the thicker area to the thinner area. This is just a quick way to kind of make fast movement towards that taper that you want. From here on, I need to start raking it down with something that evenly distributes the waves and bumps that are on the clay. So after this, I usually come along with what I call as a kidney tool. And you notice there's little sharp teeth along the edge, and that allows me to rake down all the high points and transition from thicker to thinner all the way out to the blending edge. Just be cautious that you don't scratch your surface of your plate. You don't want any scratches on it. But as you do this, you'll find that you're raking it down evenly, and you'll end up with a lot of little clay crumbs or, stuff you want to discard. But a little quick way to get rid of all this stuff is you just grab a little ball of clay and roll it up into a little hot dog and roll it over the top of the surface to pick up all those extra crumbs. This even works on a full face or a head sculpture as well. But you notice I'm using the soft clay for this sculpture because it's not a difficult sculpture and it's very fast to work with. That's a good thing about clean clay. And it does come in various hardnesses. So you can get soft all the way to extra hard. Its color is a good contrast between maybe a Chivant or a brown or a green clay. So you can do your flashing as well. Now here's kind of a fast version of roughing up the sculpture. I'm using various rakes and detail tools to take off all that excess, all those bumps and stuff. And here I'm laying a piece of my template on there. You saw it flipped it from side to side just to double check the balance and the symmetry of the sculpture. My rakes will range anywhere from a hacksaw blade to a guitar string from a bass guitar. Now here I'm tapping some detail in, and you notice if you look very carefully, I have a sheet of plastic over the surface of the clay. That allows me to get some nice detail without leaving clay bumps or hard edges of clay that are raised up by that action. And here I'm using a roller tool which has a repeating pattern of linear lines that gives me a good skin detail. Then I go back across again with my little finger cot, which has little dimples on it. You notice I've got these little bumps there. So that is kind of a real good shortcut on adding pore texture to something. And they come in multiple sizes. You can get them online or at a stationery store. You can even use them on all four fingers, I guess, if you're in a hurry. But it really is a fast way to add some texture or softening of rough areas you might have really roughed up or done very broadly. You can soften things down. And here I'm using that rolling tool again. And from here, I'm tapping it down. And you notice this it's a good shortcut from just doing all of this and then mopping it down with alcohol. Now here I'm peeling off the plastic, which gives a nice finish to the texture that I've just applied. There we go. And you notice that it's all pretty much done. But before I carry on, I want to go around the edges with a little 99% alcohol just to clean the surface of my plate, because that's where the contact area is going to be when I put the top mold against the plate after the sculpture has been removed and the mold is made. So you want that contact area to be really tight. So I usually clean it off really good with some alcohol. Then I'll take a little talcum powder and I use a firm brush and I brush it over the sculpted area, and it really helps soften down some of that sculptural detail that I've added. But it also does not remove anything that maybe alcohol would or another solvent. So the powder kind of gives you a good way to preview your sculpture. So, brush it down with some powder. The stiff brush helps soften some areas that are a little too strong. Then I come back with a wider broad brush just to brush off any excess, any excess powder. And then if you want to go back in and do some more detailing, you can. If you want to make it even softer, you can wipe over it with some 99% alcohol. And here again, I'm starting to lay down my flashing. Now the flashing is made basically from those flat strips of clay you saw me make earlier. Off to the left there, you see a big slab of clay that's about 1/8 of an inch thick. And by setting it down and slicing off little strips, you can go around the perimeter of your sculpture. I like to leave about 1/4 of an inch of a cutting edge. That's that little gray area you see between the two white pieces of clay. But anywhere between 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch, depending on how much room you have. You see at the edges, I don't have a lot of room. But you do want to make sure that you have a good contact area. If it's too close, it's not going to work out for you. Also, as you're trimming away with your tool on that flashing, make sure you tilt your tool so it's like a 45-degree angle. So you're not going 90 degrees straight down with it. The reason being is that will help deter any air bubbles from getting caught. And if you're going to be spraying baldies or even applying a mold release in that area, that 45-degree angle opens up a much broader area and makes it structurally stronger. So here I usually just go right around my edges with my strips. You saw I cut the strips there, so it's easily to just pick them up and go around. They bend and turn at every point you want them to. I press them down. If you have problems with things not sticking to your plate, you could smear on a little Vaseline and then wipe it off. It'll help it stick. And here I'm using my tools where one piece of flashing touches the other just to smooth it over. And then I like to use that tool just to make sure everything is smooth and get that 45-degree angle as I trim down with the edge of my tool. The tool that I use for this, I use various paddle tools, and of course my favorite, my number 7 spatula, which has a nice flat curved end so I can get in there where I need to go, and a little pointy end where I can get into small detailed areas. And because it's stainless steel, it slides across the surface and it helps me position. And here I'm using my other tool just to slice off that excess that hangs over the edge. So a couple of paddle tools for mold making and getting all of your flashing done, and a number 7 will usually do the job. And here I've finished it off. I've sprayed it with a coating of crystal clear spray, and I've used boards to basically make a little wall around my sculpture and my plate. And as you see, I've kind of, after I put them into place, I used hot glue to tighten up all the boards so they can't move away. And then right where the boards meet the clay, I took a fine bead of clay, pressed it into the edges, and used my tools to smooth it down. So none of my molding material drips down between the boards and the sculpting plate. Now the material I'm using here is called Repro. It's made by a company that's a polyester resin, 1 part A, 1 part B. Repro is the brand name. There's a product called 1630 made by BJB that works very similar. Some people can even use epoxy resins for the same thing. But this is a really good product in that it gives you plenty of working time, and it sets fast enough so you don't waste time waiting for a material to set. You know, an hour before you can demold it is great. If you can do this last thing at night and let it sit overnight, that's even better. Now here I'm blowing with some air to make sure there's no surface bubbles. And this stays liquid enough to allow me to do that without a problem. You notice that last burst of air was because I'm using an air gun. It's easy to splatter that stuff everywhere, so be cautious when you're using an air gun. Later you'll see me come back with an air brush, which gives me a little more control. I can dial down the actual air pressure so I don't get any splashback all over me or my surface in my work area. I save my brush so I can use it another time. And at the end of this process, if the stuff hasn't set, I can clean it off my brush and clean my brush out with acetone and save it for another molding later on. So here I'm pouring the rest of my resin into it. A good way to find out how much resin to make is basically I weigh my sculpting plate, because the mold itself because of the thinness of the prosthetics I've sculpted. It doesn't need to be much thicker than the plate itself. So here I weighed it, came up with the exact amount I need to make the top mold piece. And as you see, my bucket is empty. I left enough in the bottom of it to break it loose later when it dries. And it removes easily from the bucket and allows me to reuse my bucket at another time. So here's my airbrush. I'm getting in there, doing that final spraying and getting it all done. Next we'll demold this thing. Okay, let's open this baby up. Put our stuff away. Great thing about these plastic buckets is when this stuff is all set, it cleans right out. Easy cleanup. Okay. This has been setting for about 3 hours. I let it set really good. You saw that I put hot glue around here. So here's how we do it. Also, I wax coated these so they released really well. Now, when you open up these kind of molds, these are really sharp. Right there, it's really sharp. So you got to clean that off. Let's see what we can do to fix that. Here we go. Before you do too much of these things, you got to make it safe. Because these things are like knives. If you're going to work with stuff like this, you got to be safe. Even plaster will do this. If you don't know what this is, it's called a sure form. They're everywhere. Okay, now I'm going to open this up, but I don't want all this dust and stuff to get in my mold. See the thickness there? So I want to get all this stuff off of here. A lot of static electricity. Try to keep your surface clean because you don't want these particles to get into your mold or all over the place. I know it's hard, but you got to clean up as you go sometimes. Okay, here we go. All right, now, fun part. Open the mold standing up like this. My favorite opening pliers. Find a nice spot here. I go for the corner because I do have flashing that's close to these edges and I don't want to damage it. So I'm just going to go to the corner, give it a twist. And that popped it loose. Once you kind of break the seal, then you get in there, open her up. Look at that. Wow. Nice and clean. That's what spraying a little mold release on there. I just sprayed with a layer of crystal clear. Then I put a spray mold release on there. There's a lot of different kinds out there. I think the kind that I use was something called Free Coat. So crystal clear, let it dry. Free Coat, let it dry. Look how clean the mold comes out. And this is a flat mold, so it's kind of like cheating. But if this was a monster or an age makeup with lots of gnarly stuff in it, A little mold release sure makes things clean out easier. Now I'm going to get all this clay out of here. Use yourself a plastic spatula. Now I'm going to save all this clay because it's going to tell me how much silicone I need by volume. I sculpted this whole thing in clean clay because of a time factor. This is what I call a 48-hour turnaround. I only had so much time to do this because these prosthetics need to go to Hawaii and they have a makeup test next week. So I want to make sure they have them in plenty of time so they can get acquainted with the pieces, mess around with them a little bit. This is for an emergency tracheotomy. If you don't know what that is, that's when you can't breathe and have to cut into your throat right in this area and poke a tube in so people can breathe. So it's for a TV show being shot in Hawaii, and my friend Laura is running the show, and one of my makeup artists from Lost. I made a lot of good friends over there, and I'm glad to see they're carrying on, doing some cool stuff. But as I mentioned before, I did all this in clean clay because I can sculpt really, it's softer than normal clay. So when you're texturing, you can texture very quickly. I use texture stamps and tools on this, so I could just texture the heck out of it super fast. It just speeds up your sculpting time. This is not a detailed sculpture. It's basically what I call a utility prosthetic. It's made to fit on just about anybody. It's a generic piece. It's a neck piece. And I want it to be able to fit whoever they have to put it on. And you can use it for multiple things. This will just be one of my standard stock pieces now. It was kind of a rush job. They need 3 pieces, so I'm going to knock out 3 or 4 pieces. I always like to give someone a little extra. It doesn't cost much time if you can go through the trouble to give them a little bit of extra. Okie dokie. So that's really nice and clean. Now, the great thing about clean clay too is I can take soap and water and get all this residue out. Don't have to use any chemicals on it, but this is the fun part. So that's all my flashing. Doesn't take much. Now, here's the thing to pay attention to. It's thicker in the middle and tapers out. If I want this to be really tight, I need to drill a little hole right there for excess silicone to escape. That means when I press it together, the squishiness of the silicone doesn't keep the mold from going together. Because it can. So if you have an escape to take the pressure off of that sponginess the silicone can give you, that's the best way to go. So I'm going to take just a little pencil mark. This is the thickest part, so I'm just going to do a little circle right there. Later on, I'll drill a little hole there, maybe 1/8 of an inch. There we go. Not much. Here we go again. Now this is the thickest part of this. So here, let's do this. See how thick that is? That's where I want a little circle right there. I'll just mark it. That way I know where to put my hole. See how it tapers out? This clay is no good anymore because it's been coated with crystal clear and with mold release. So this is a bunch of clay that is not usable for anything. Great. There we go. Look how easy that cleanup is. Okie doke. A little soap and water. Drill a hole. Liquid wax release. Then spray release. Then Baldies. Then silicone. It will be all done. And this is how much silicone it's going to take to run this mold. And what I like to do is I'll just put this into a cup. There we go. So that's my quantity. See? It's probably going to end up being about this much in the cup. However, when I run the silicone, I'm going to put it in this cup because as it evacuates, it's going to rise up and then collapse. So I don't want it to bubble over in my vacuum chamber. So that's the amount of silicone I need to mix. So I'll eyeball it. When I mix it up, it'll give me an eyeball. I'll make my notes, run it in this, and I'll just make notes. Probably the first run, maybe too soft or too firm. I'll determine that. So anything after that will be the perfect color and the perfect density of silicone. And there we go. Mold complete.
Well, I hope you got all that. There's a lot of information there, but store it away, review these videos as much as you can, and I hope you learned something along the way with everything I'm teaching you. So make sure that you come back and visit, subscribe, and like this video. We'll see you next time at the FaceMaker Factory.